Children of the Corn Art 1. Yellow eyes in the cornfield. When a car breaks down in the middle of a deserted road, it's always a bad sign, especially when on both sides of the highway stretch endless, towering cornfields with golden ears rustling in the wind like someone whispering in secret. That's exactly how the trip began, with silence, the smell of gasoline, and trembling fingers gripping the steering wheel. Alexander, his wife Olya, and their 12-year-old daughter Liza were returning from a vacation on the Black Sea. They had chosen a shortcut through rural areas. The GPS guided them through abandoned villages and lonely farms, and everything was going fine, until the engine died. "Damn it," Alexander cursed, slapping the steering wheel. "What the hell? We just filled up." Olya looked around anxiously. The sun was slowly dipping toward the horizon, bathing the field in honey-colored light. And Liza, her forehead pressed against the glass, suddenly said, "Someone's there." "What did you say?" her mother asked, turning around. "In the corn," the girl whispered. "I saw eyes." Alexander stepped out of the car to check the engine. Liza opened the window, letting the wind touch her face. It carried a strange, sour smell, like rotting fruit. She looked back at the cornfield. The stalks were tall and thick, nearly twice a person's height. And something really did flash between them. Yellow eyes. "Mama," Liza backed away. "There's definitely someone there." Olya looked in the same direction. Nothing. But a deep unease settled in her chest. Her instincts screamed, "We should have left an hour ago." When Alexander returned, his face was grim. "The car won't start. Something with the fuel system. Maybe someone can come get us?" Cell service had vanished half an hour ago. GPS was down too. The road was empty. No cars, no houses, no people, just corn everywhere. "We need to find help. Maybe there's a village up ahead. I'll go," he said, glancing at his watch. "It'll be dark soon." "I'm coming with you," Olya insisted. "Number stay with Liza. I won't be long. Don't leave the car." He walked down the road and soon disappeared around the bend. Olya and Liza were alone. An hour passed. The sun had set. The corn whispered louder. "Mama," Liza whispered again, trembling. "They're getting closer." "Who?" "The children. They're calling me." Olya gripped her hand tighter. "Quiet. It's just the wind. Don't go anywhere, understand?" Liza nodded, but as soon as her mother turned away, the girl opened the door and stepped onto the road. She walked slowly, as if in a trance, toward the field. Olya rushed after her, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Are you crazy? What are you doing?" "They're calling. They're lonely, Mama." 3 children emerged from the corn. They looked about 10 to 12 years old, gaunt in tattered clothes, barefoot. Their faces were dirty, and their eyes glowed with a strange yellow light. They didn't speak. They just stared. Liza reached toward them, but Olya shielded her with her body. "Get away from us! Who are you?" The children silently turned and disappeared among the stalks, but at that moment, the wind howled with such force that the car doors rattled and the field roared like 1,000 voices. The sky turned a dark, bloody red. From deep within the corn came a voice, high-pitched, childlike, and yet ancient. "He has come, the Elder, the Lord of the harvest. You are outsiders. Outsiders are not allowed here." Olya grabbed Liza and shoved her back into the car. The girl no longer resisted. Her eyes were vacant, just like the others. She murmured, "We must stay. He chose us." Then in the distance came Alexander's scream, long, agonizing, and then silence. Absolute. Even the corn no longer whispered. Olya knew If they stayed here until morning, no one would make it out. Part 2. The Lord of the Harvest night fell too fast, far too fast, as if the sun had collapsed into a vortex of darkness. The moon hung low and blood-red, like a rotting lantern over a hellish stage. Inside the car it was cold, despite the windows being shut. Olya held Lisa close, trying to warm her, but her heart pounded in her chest like a trapped bird. "It'll be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to her daughter. But Liza said nothing. She stared into the darkness beyond the glass, as if someone out there was calling her name. And someone was calling. At first, a whisper, then louder. Her name, drawn long through the dark. "Liza!" Olya jolted. "Number, that's impossible. It's a hallucination. Just stress, fear, the dark." But then the girl opened the door and ran. "Liza!" Olya screamed, leaping after her. The wind howled so fiercely it drowned her voice. The corn parted for the girl as though it knew where she was going. Olya chased her, stalks whipping her face, the earth beneath her feet growing soft, like she was trampling over dead flesh. She stumbled until she emerged into a clearing. The corn receded here, revealing a round open space, at the edges of which stood children, dozens of them, all different ages, dressed in rags, faces smeared with dirt, and the same glowing yellow eyes, inhuman, unblinking. Liza stood in the center. Before her, a throne of dried stalks and cobs, crowned with a bull's skull. Upon it, him, the Lord of the Harvest. He was tall, too tall to be a man, twined in vines with stalks jutting from his back like horns. His skin was the color of dried grain, his face a mask made of decaying corn husks. Behind it, only darkness. He raised a hand and the children screamed, all at once, in unison. It wasn't a scream, it was a prayer. "He is hungry. You came. You crossed the boundary. The harvest needs blood." Olya lunged toward her daughter, grabbing her by the shoulders. "We're leaving. Now!" But Liza pulled away. Her eyes were glowing brighter now, and she smiled, gently, like her mother was interrupting something important. "He chose me. I am the seed." "You are a child." The Lord rose, now towering nearly 3 meters. He moved toward them, step by step, the corn behind him coming alive, leaves stretching like claws. And as he lifted his hand, roots began to sprout from the earth, writhing toward Olya. She grabbed Liza and ran, back into the corn, running through a maze where every path seemed to fold in on itself. But Olya didn't stop. Stalks scraped her skin, her dress tore, her legs sank into mud up to her knees, but she could hear her daughter's breath, feel the girl trembling again, as if for a moment the spell had weakened. "Mama," Liza whimpered, "he's inside me." "No, do you hear me? We'll get out. We'll find people. We won't stay." Light, faint, up ahead. And they burst through, onto the road. Alexander was standing by the car. "Sasha!" Olya cried. "You're alive!" But something was wrong. He stood too straight, unnaturally still. His face calm, but his eyes were glowing. Yellow. "You brought her," he said, walking closer. "Now the family is complete. The harvest will be generous." "No, you're not him. What did you do to him?" And it smiled. The corn behind him stirred. The children emerged from it, the same ones, with yellow eyes, and then the village, as if it had always been there. Olya turned, and behind her stood houses, small, crooked, wooden. Narrow streets lit by reddish lamps. A sign on one of the buildings read, Semyonovka, population, infinity. From the homes, others emerged. adults, all with eyes like the children's. One by one, they spoke. "Welcome home." Olya grabbed Liza's hand and screamed, "We're not staying," but the ground cracked beneath her. Roots emerged. Dry, clutching, they wrapped around her legs, pulling her downward. Liza suddenly turned to her and whispered, "Mama, you have to stay." "But me? I'm already here." Her eyes blazed brighter. She smiled and slipped from her mother's grasp, stepping toward the Lord of the Harvest, who now stood behind her, as if he had risen from the night itself. And Olya, in one final act of will, collapsed to the earth and screamed, so loud that the sky seemed to tremble, and she woke up, lying in a bed, white walls, a hospital, daylight, the sun. "Where am I?" A nurse approached. "You're in the regional clinic. They found you by the car. We didn't find your daughter. You were in shock. There was no one else there." "The corn," Olya whispered. "The children. The Lord." The nurse smiled gently. "Rest now." She left. Olya heard the door lock behind her, and she was alone. On the bedside table lay a single ear of corn, raw, fresh, and between the kernels, something glowed. Yellow, part 3, the seed. A week had passed. Olya was still in the clinic. The white walls were closing in. The dreams came every night, and always the corn, and Liza's voice, whispering, calling. Each night was a small death. Each morning, a tortured return. No one believed her. "You experienced a post-traumatic episode," the doctor explained with tired condescension. "You were found alone. There were no traces of the girl nearby." "It's possible. You lost her earlier. We suspect psychogenic shock." Olya screamed at him. "You don't understand. She's with them. There's a village. Children with yellow eyes. He lives in the corn. He's waiting for new ones." But the doctor only wrote something in his notepad. Then the nurses came with injections, and the world faded into cotton silence. Until one night she heard a rustling from the vent. "Mama!" Olya jumped out of bed, heart in her throat. The rustling grew louder. Something was scratching the inside of the vent cover. "Mama! He will rise soon. You have to see the harvest." The vent cover fell off. A small hand appeared, dirty, with broken fingernails. Olya stepped back, but she didn't scream. She only watched as Liza crawled out of the shaft, as if it were completely normal. She was still a girl, and not. You're alive?" "I am the seed, Mama. He gave me a new body, a new purpose." "Who is he?" "The one who was before cities, before people. The Lord of the Harvest, master of fertile ground. He sleeps beneath the soil. We, the children, are his sprouts. Why did you leave me? Because you are the last. You are the mother." "Mother?" "All who resisted burned. You remained. He chose you." Liza stepped closer. Yellow light wept from her eyes, leaving resin-like trails on her cheeks. "The harvest begins with the next moon. You must be there." "No, I'm not going back. Never. But you're already there, Mama. You always were." And in that moment, the window vanished. Behind it, corn. A wall, tall, alive, moving. The white walls slowly grew mold. Blood began to drip from the ceiling. The ground appeared beneath her feet, software, the damp scent of rot. And then, the screaming, the screams of children. She was in the field again. Only now, she remembered everything. Once, 13 years ago, Olya had already been here, young, pregnant, in a car. She and Alexander had gotten lost, found a village, strange, timeless, cut off. But the children were kind. They gave them corn. And then, darkness. Liza was born a month later, but she was strange, too smart, too quiet. Even then, yellow sparks shimmered in her pupils. Olya hadn't remembered, until now. Now she knew. Liza wasn't her daughter. She was the Lord's sprout, planted in her womb, brought out of the field into our world. But he demands a return. The harvest is a ritual of blood, seed, and mother. You remember, Liza said. That means it's time. The Lord stepped from the clearing. Behind him, children, dozens, then hundreds, and each one whispered, "Harvest." He approached Olya, and for the first time she saw his face. There were no features, only a gaping maw of earth. He was the soil, the hunger, a god older than memory, worshipped when humans still prayed to the sun and to bones. He touched her forehead, and yellow fire burst in Olya's eyes. "I see." She remembered how, in every generation, women came here, gave birth, forgot, left. She was one of them, the last, the final seed, and then she smiled. Yes, the harvest has come. She dropped to her knees, and the earth opened. Roots rose and consumed her, and with her, the field sighed. Cornflowers bloomed, cobs filled with blood-red juice. A cry swept across the land, and then silence. Epilogue. They found Semyonovka 3 days later. A group of tourists got lost and stumbled upon the old village. Only now it was alive, street lamps glowing, children playing, houses solid and neat. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. "What's this village called?" one of the tourists asked. A boy with yellow eyes replied, "We call it the Cradle of the Harvest," and he laughed. At the edge of the endless cornfield among the stalks stood a woman in white. Her eyes burned. She stared at the horizon and waited for the next ones to come.